Greetings and welcome to another Sabbath Insight. Of course, I am Chief Yuya, and in this particular piece we want to do, I want to talk about the watchers, the whisperers, and the ones who we can say uh, taught war. So when you look at names like Aazelle, Simjaza, Harut, Marut, Ogun, Orumila, there's a commonality in that. You're not just looking at names, but you're looking at codes. You're looking at names of entities who touched down on the earth and left behind certain prophecy, certain technology, and more importantly, bloodlines. So not just in speaking about spirits, but talking about engineers, breeders, rulers. You know, when you're looking at those particular energies, when you look at the book of Enoch, or you look at the Torah, you have certain watchers that are named. You know, you read Bereshit where it says, in those days, in Nephilim, or there were Nephilim in those days, and when the sons of Elohim came into the daughters of men. So you have Shimjaza, which was like the chief of the watchers, and he led a rebellion from heavenly order. You have Azazel, who he taught like the making of swords, knives, adornments, paints, seduction, cosmetics. So the whole earth had been corrupted by Azazel, you know, and they all ascribed to sin. Then you have Kokabel, you have Pinemu, you know, who taught secret wisdoms. So they weren't necessarily just rebels, but they were specialists of cosmetics, specialists of astrology, specialists of herbology, you know. When you look in the Quran and you have the Babylonian trials and the second surah, and it speaks about how they that follow what the devils used to recite in the reign of Solomon. But Solomon wasn't an unbeliever. It was the devils who disbelieved, teaching people magic and what was sent down to the angels at Babylon, Harut and Marut. So Harut and Marut, they weren't demonic energies, as people sometimes teach. They were angelic energies, and they were sent with divine knowledge. But they warned the people when they taught them, we're only a trial, so do not disbelieve. So the technology that they gave was a test that the people failed. And they used certain seals, certain tongues, certain names, but people began to unlock doors that they didn't have the keys to close behind them. You know, and that's an important thing a lot of times when you hear me speak about morals over magic, because a lot of times, you remember like in the book I wrote, The 14 Keys, one of the key essence of that text is that your keys are your principles. So you can go to a door and behind it, you believe there's something that you want, right? So you can kick in the door, right? And you kick the door in, but you didn't necessarily have the key. So how do you close it and lock it back behind you? You know, when you open up a realm to certain entities or certain energies that you have not built the principles yet to open. You haven't built that. You don't have the discipline. You don't have the integrity. You don't have the scholarship. You don't have the spiritual communion. You don't have the clarity of thought. You don't have the emotional regulation. I mean, I could just go straight through the emotional maturity, right? Even the nervous system. But you find out a way to kick the door open. You find someone who will teach you how to do that, which is usually a fallen one, who you may call your priest or your babalao or your guru or your iya. And the door is now kicked open, but you can't close it back because you never had the principle / key to unlock it and lock it to begin with. When you look, even in Isheshe, when the Orisha descended, you have the Odu, Ogunda Mejin, and it speaks about when Orumila descends with messages from Oludumare to teach Ifa, but he was met with temptation, he was met with betrayal, he was met with resistance. Now, when you're looking at Orumila, you're looking at the principle of divine wisdom. You're looking at Ogun. You're looking at invention, you know, metalworking. Even Eshu, you're looking at messages. And of course, that divine aspect of messaging was twisted by colonizers, and Eshu became the devil because, you know, if you don't have a devil, you won't have a religion for most people. You know, you gotta have something that explains why you behave the way you do. You know, but there's a huge difference in Ifa. Balance was always the key. You know, in Enoch and in the Quran, the fall occurred when balance was broken. So even if you're looking at a Kibalionic or Nubian cosmology, the descent of divine beings was always a risk, you know, because you can teach too much too fast and then humans destroy themselves. You see, this gives some of the answers of why when people say, well, you don't teach the Orisha stuff as much as you used to, or this and that. Yeah, because I realized that I was giving you things that you were not ready for. Um, and the principles and the character needed to be built inside of you first. And many rebelled against that. Many said, oh, I don't listen to Chief anymore. I don't follow anymore. I was studying under him, but I left. I don't mess with him anymore because he's not teaching me the magic. Morals over magic. You know, that was a mistake on my part. That was a part of my journey where when I first came in, I assumed morality of the people. I assumed the people had integrity. I assumed the people had honor. And so we were ready to now go into some of the deeper schools of information. But I came to find out that none of that was true and that individuals were still very much prisoners and in bondage to their own lack of development. And so we had to go to the foundations and build up from there. Hence, you have the Anu Way Foundations, Volume 1, right? Uh, but it doesn't mean that the lessons are any less profound. In fact, I would say they are far more profound than me just teaching you occultism and esoteric information, because you're learning how to rebuild the temple, you know, that has been decimated and destroyed. So it's similar to, like, again, I spoke about the Dogon before, and the Nomo and the Sirius Star Code. You know, in Mali, the Dogon speak, of course, the Nomo, which are these amphibious sort of beings coming from the Sirius B star system, and they came down in a fiery arc. Right? You again have this spaceship sort of motif again, and they brought mathematics, they brought maps of the cosmos, they brought language, and they were described as dual sex beings. And if you notice that mirrors the Elohim description, you know, where male and female, you know, maybe them. So it's again that dual sex. So there was a majestic aspect there, but a plurality there. And they promised to return to the earth when human beings, or rather when the earth forgot who she is, which was the phrase. So the Dogon had knowledge of Sirius B way before your quote unquote modern telescopes did. So therefore, you know, it wasn't just folklore, but it was data from a actual real download. Um, Entities that often, you know, they came to teach and then they got worshiped. Just because someone teaches you something doesn't mean you should worship them, you know, because oftentimes what they are teaching you, at least the good ones, they are teaching you how to reconnect to your cosmic parentage and bloodline, you know, but people begin to worship the compass. You know, they worship the GPS, they worship the messenger, you know. Again, if you look at Azazel, uh, who dealt with seduction, corruption, weapons, Harut and Marut, is Islamic, you know, Ogun, you know, the Nomo, dealing with cosmic knowledge and how to align DNA. You even had Viracocha, that was an Inc, and then the Incan you had, who was Incan, then you had Quetzalcoatl, who was Aztec. You know, Quetzalcoatl brought food, you know, more specifically maize, you know, but Quetzalcoatl brought maize and different understandings of time and calendars. Then you had Tahuti, for instance. Tahuti taught the science of time. Tahuti taught the science of writing, even magic. So you notice that there's a different name across systems, right? Whether it's Hebrew, you know, you read in the book of Enoch, whether it's the Quran and you're reading about the Ishmaelite or the Mohammedan journey, or it's Incan, or it's Aztec, the patterns are actually the same. The names may be different, but the pattern is the exact same. What's the pattern? Descend, teach, get worshipped, corrupt or withdraw, leave behind bloodlines, temples, and prophecies. Go across all the systems. You're going to find the same thing. Go across all of them, See, and I knew people say, like, well, what kind of religion or this and that? And I explained, like, no, I'm showing you the root teaching of all of them, of all of the good ones, right? And that's where you find the truth, because there's a pattern that exists across many. And there's a pattern sometimes of corrupt, not always good patterns. Sometimes there's patterns of corruption where people make things up that make no sense, or sometimes people add things. And it's hard for some of you to possibly imagine that your holy books have been added to. They have been corrupted. They're evil. Some of the books that you read that you swear are so correct, they have the hand of the devil in them. It's kind of like, I remember when years ago, when Ipega released the Sacred Odu. It was a book that many Babalawo would then use, especially those who didn't memorize their Odu. They would use it as a reference as they were doing the Afa or doing readings. And I would have to remind people that it was Philip Neimark who translated and wrote that book with Ipega. You can look up Philip Neimark. Philip Neimark is a fraud. He's a fraud. He was someone who the Ifa Council had to address because of his behavior and because of him lying about his initiations. Go look up Philip Neimark. He has a organization down in Florida. Beautiful piece of land. But yeah, so a lot of times the hand of the devil is right there in the midst of the teachings of those of us who are the children of the prophecy. So you think you're getting one thing, but you're actually getting poison. Let's look at Aazelle for a second. It's good to understand the linguistic roots. In Hebrew, you have Aazelle, and it's usually broken down, I would say, into like two components. Azaz means rugged or fierce or strong, right? And then, of course, you have El. El is a divine force, or some of you would translate as God, which is a very weak translation. But if you look at Aazelle, it's the ferocity of the divine force, of the strength of the divine force. But there's a darker side to that, because some could also interpret as the one who turns away from the strength of Yah, or the strength of El, or the one who is arrogant towards El, which of course it implies a rebellion cloaked inside of a strength, if you will. So just like when you read in the book of Enoch, Aazelle is not just sort of written as a name, but Aazelle is written as a chief corrupter. So Aazelle taught warfare, taught metallurgy, taught seductive arts, very important one. So Aazelle learned or taught to turn divine knowledge into tools of vanity, into tools of violence, into tools of seduction. So therefore, Aazazelle's name became synonymous with scapegoating. The name became synonymous with blame. So when you look at Enoch 10:8, it says, to him ascribed all sin. So that's why you have on like Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement, in Leviticus 16, it uses the name Aazelle when the scapegoat is sent into the wilderness, right? This is when they're doing the ebos, if you will. And that scapegoat symbolically carries the sins of the people away. So the goat was not offered to Elohim, but was sent away. So that was symbolical or symbology related to Aazelle, the one who exists outside of the camp beyond the border, right? So there's these spiritual layers, if you look at it, in meaning Az, meaning fierce or strong or arrogant. That's domination, that's self-exaltation, Azaz means like to be hardened, but it's you're hardened against divine instruction, and then El connects to a heavenly origin. So you automatically have the concept of this is a fallen being. This is a Nephilim, one who is hardened, or the strength of Yah turned rogue is another way to look at it. So there's a significance to these names when you look at like Azazel as an archetype. Azazel is the archetype of genius that's been perverted. The people who turn divine inspiration into systems of domination. The false inspirer, which is really what we're getting to. The one who made war artistic, or who made vanity spiritual. So not just from a demonic place, but there's like a cultural template. You have the warlord who comes forth. We see this a lot of times. The warlord who comes forth, who claims to be a prophet. Then you have like the preacher who wills seduction as doctrine. You have artists who channel divinity, but they give the glory to themselves. So Azazel is like the blueprint of the possessed genius, brilliant, admired, but utterly and totally and wholly connected from divine law. You see? So when you look at the question, I would put like who's inspiring you or what's inspiring you. Azazel kind of stands as the gatekeeper of what we would call counterfeit brilliance, and that's when your inspiration, it leads to an inflated or elevated ego. Your inspiration glorifies sensuality only. Your inspiration leads to chaos, or it weaponizes creativity. Weaponized creativity. So in those moments, you realize like I'm in Azazel's hands, maybe possessed by Azazel. You also had Shimjaza. Shimjaza is another interesting entity that you see written out in the book of Enoch. So that's what I'm saying. It's important that you study under people who know language, but who know how to study and who have been given divine inspiration. Because you can sit inside of your churches for years and never ever hear your preacher speak one word of Aramaic, speak one word of Hebrew, speak one word of Akkadian or Sumerian. So then what the hell are you doing up there? What are you doing? Now, I just have to ask that to the preachers, because there are preachers who do watch me. What are you doing? Like, you're just performing at that point. You're usher. You're really usher. You're just up there performing. You have on a nice suit. You have nice jewelry, and you're just performing. You see? So you are representing the spirit of Azazel. You are using seduction. You're using vanity. Many of you are using cosmetics. You see? A lot of you didn't know that cosmetics is an ancient thing that came from a Nephilim. So again, we look at Simjaja, or sometimes called Shimyaza, or Samyaza, or Simyazaz. That's another entity, because it's often referred to as the leader of the Watchers, the one who actually initiated the celestial rebellion that you see in the book of Enoch. But if you look at it linguistically, spiritually, and mythically, there's a bit more to Shimyaza. So you might have heard already in the name. Some of you play with the Hebrew a little bit. Shim means the name or the renowned. So when you see Shimyaza or Shimyazaz or Shim or Shemite, which people will say Semite or Semitic, it's actually Shim. But the name, it may not appear within your biblical canon. And to make something clear, this may be kind of a rough one for some of you. I don't just go by biblical canon. Why would I? That would be stupid. That would be so stupid, because a bunch of perverted, wicked Catholic bishops get together and say, let's take these African texts. Let's take these African texts and let's decide what portions we are going to include and not include. And then we'll talk about which portions we'll say are inspired by God. Like, if you don't get the F out my face with that, I don't mean to be so vulgar, excuse me, but I think it's very stupid for a divine people from a divine bloodline to hold up a book that you don't even know the origins of. You don't even know the origins of that book. You don't even know who first printed it. You don't know the names of the bishops who sat at the Nicene councils and cut the book up. These are the same Catholic bishops who signed the papal bull, where they said it was okay to go for invaders to go into the continent of Akibalan, of Nubia, and to enslave and off people. The same people who signed the papal bull are the same people who said, let's cut up and remix and do a chop and screw on ancient African texts and then call it the Helios Biblios. And then make people swear by this, but even put your hand on the book if you're going to tell the truth when you got all these lies inside of it. Stupid. You gotta use a little bit more effort in this day and time than to just say you're going to grab this book out of the hotel drawer and you're going to read it and you're going to stand on it, and you're not going to even try to figure out where it comes from, or why in some instances the word Holy Ghost is used and in other instances the word Holy Spirit is used. You don't even ask questions like that. Or you read the book of Luke, and Luke says, I wasn't even there when the Messiah was here, but everybody else is writing a book. And because I consider myself to have perfect knowledge and information, I'm going to write my own book. Read the very first chapter of Luke. Just read it. You assume that everybody who's in that book, or everybody who's writing something, or their words are in that book, actually have anything to do with the Elohim. You got some people that's like, yo, I want to be down too. Let me throw something in there. You got people who weren't even there when it was going down. They weren't even there when it was going down. So if you read the Enochian and the Aramaic fragments, you can understand certain things in better parts. So if we look at Shim, Shim means reputation. It doesn't just mean name, but it means identity and it means authority, right? So it's related to Aazelle in a sense, in terms of the rebellion or the rise, if you will. But so you have Shim. And if you interpret it properly, you'll understand it's he who puts his name on high. So he who puts his name on high is an implication of pride. It's an implication of self-deification. It's an implication of desiring to exalt one's authority above Elohim. That connects to your Bereshit or your Genesis 6:4, where it says those were the mighty men of old, men of renown. Shim means also renown. It's the root of the name Shimjaza or Shimyaza, right? That's one whose fame actually came from corruption. So the name of a rebellion, which is really a fusion between the name Shim and Aazelle. So Shim is the name, and Aazelle, as in Aazelle, is the arrogance or the strength or the rebellion, right? So if you're able to sort of look at that, or again, read the book of Enoch, which you might ask, well, why isn't that in the Bible? If it ain't in the Bible, just don't be so silly. Sometimes I've had people want to speak about these things, and I don't speak about them because if you don't study, you can't speak to me. That's part of the prerequisite to having a conversation with me about something. I am not going to discuss anything based on ignorance. So if I've taken the time, the 43 years Yeah. The 43 years that I have been studying, and I've taken the time to study things, and you come along and you've been in the way for a year or three, or you're not even in the truth yet, but you're just full of speculation, but you ain't studied nothing. You're not qualified to study, to not study, excuse me, you're not qualified to debate with me. I'm just not going to have it. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to bait me into it. Nothing. Because you haven't put the scholarship in. And even if you did put the scholarship in starting now, you'll never catch up to me. So go debate someone on your level. You'll never be on my level because I'll be departed. Every moment that goes by, I got another year on you. I got another moment on. You'll never catch up, right? So respect your elders, right? Ultimately, respect your elders. So sometimes, like I said, people come and like, well, what about this? Just because you don't understand something, it's probably because you haven't really taken the time to really try to learn it. Or when people say to me, oh, well, you're not teaching E5. You don't even know, you didn't know what the word E5 meant until I taught you. Go back to all the Orisha teachings and find someone who you find anyone online who teaches it better than I taught it. And I'm not trying to brag or anything like that, but that should spark something in your intelligence. That alone, find someone else who's done it better. I promise you won't find anyone because I've looked for them. I've tried to find people I could partner with and we can study together and stuff. They didn't exist. So you who have maybe been exposed to a little bit of information for a couple of years, or you're not even older than my time of studying. If I've been studying and learning and reading and communing and engaging and meditating and all the things that go along with being a warrior scholar, if I've been doing that for 43 years and you're 35 or you're 40, nah, you can't. You can't do it. That would be like me going to Minister Louis Farrakhan and I want to debate with him about how he runs the Nation of Islam. When he took over the nation in 78, but prior to 78, he was a minister in the Nation of Islam, national minister, then took over. So let's just say he's been in the supreme leadership position since 78. The messenger died in 75, right? So count up. Some of you weren't even born yet in 1978, let alone leading an organization. I know I certainly wasn't leading anything in 1978. So my 43 years of study, not even of leadership, could never compare to his time of leadership. I would be a fool to debate with him. And even to this day, I don't necessarily agree with everything he says or everything he does, but I would keep that to myself. I would keep that to myself because I'm actually not qualified to have that debate because the man has been running something, some could say successfully, since 1978, right? So it's important to understand when you're looking at identity, see that Shim, that rebellion of the Shim or the Simjaza is putting yourself above, without any studying anything. I just want to be. That's why Shimyaza was the ringleader of the 200 fallen angels. So you gotta be careful, people like that, because I've had people like want to debate and stuff, and then they do little videos and stuff, and they talking nonsense, and you got fools who will sit there and listen to them. So you'll fall with them, but you'll notice something that's important. This is something just for you to make a note of. I never reply. In all the years that people have disagreed and wanted to get into it, make a note of something. You have never heard me reply one time. Not once. That should tell you something. that should tell you something. And it's not that I studied pre-law in school. I was a pre-law major at one point. I went from electrical engineering to pre-law with a minor in English. So I am no stranger to debate. I know how to debate. I know how to make a point. I know how to look at things objectively. And I also know how to support, foundate, and propagate a certain argument, a point of view in a very effective way. I've been doing it for a really long time. So I'm not afraid of that. But debate is only for opinions. Now, if you want to deliberate truth, we could do that. But if your level of deliberation of the truth is a level that I've maybe covered 30 years ago or 25 years ago, then you need to find someone who's at your level to deliberate the truth with, because doing it with me, you won't add anything to my library. And I'll have to descend to have that with you. So most of the time when people want to have those, the reason you don't get a response to me, because it would be a descent. It would be me descending from my throne to do it. I know it sounds very arrogant. That's why I usually don't talk about it much, but I'm just speaking about it from the perspective of this level of teaching. There's levels, right? I'm not at the highest level. I'm nowhere near the highest level, but I know what levels are beneath me. I may not know all the levels above me because I'm still ascending and working and struggling and putting the work in, but I definitely know what's beneath me. It's like Cat Williams said once. He said, "No, I'm not the best stand-up comedian." He said, "As long as Dave Chappelle still walks the earth, I will not be the best stand-up comedian in the world." But he said, "But I know who I'm better than." So Shim was a leader, and he said unto them, "I fear you will not indeed agree to this deed. I alone have to pay the penalty of the great sin." That was in Enoch 6:3. And that deed that he was talking about was when they were going to, or they did, to send to the earth to take human wives and corrupt both the bloodlines and the knowledge. That was done on purpose. When it talks about, they looked on the wives or the daughters of men, and they saw they were fair. It makes it sound like it was just this emotional thing. Like they looked down, they saw a pretty girl and was like, "Yo, let's go destroy the bloodlines." No, they did that on purpose. Let's go disrupt these bloodlines, right? It's very nuanced, but part of the nuance is that Aazelle wasn't the most wickedest, though he got that title, by people who, scholars and things like that. He was only the organizer. Aazelle was the organizer, and he was the one who inspired others to fall. So if you were to look at it in modern day terms, Aazelle was the CEO, the chief executive officer of the rebellion. So he didn't just sin, but he built the infrastructure for mass disobedience. That's important. He built the infrastructure. He was the CEO, right? So Shim represents, or there's an attribute there, meaning renown without righteousness, fame that corrupts instead of uplifts, authority without alignment. So a name that's exalted without a divine commission. It's like again, when people take titles, I'm king this, I'm queen this, I'm Baba that, I'm Iya that, says who. Or you have people who will look inside of a book of African names or Yoruba names or Khan names and just pick one that they like because they like the flow of it. Whereas some of the greatest names that you could have may not sound so cool. Muriel is a powerful name. Ebenezer, powerful name. Elmer, powerful name, right? But it just don't really flow like Jaden. Doesn't flow like that, or Jade, right? So sometimes, like, again, that's having a name without divine commission. You want the influence of certain things without integrity. You're using charm and persuasion to lead others into rebellion. So there's a mastermind there of false unity. When you look at what these fallen Nephilim did, they masterminded that false unity, and they bound 200 others into that agreement. And it wasn't through righteousness, but it was through mutual guilt. So that's why he was like, I feel like if we do this, I'm going to take all the blame. All the blame is going to fall on me. He manipulated them. So he's the architect of collective rebellion and inspiring not just individuals, but entire orders of spirits and orders of humans to move against the design of Elohim. So there's a significance there. Again, when you look at Shimyaza is a spirit behind movements that lack nobility, but they corrupt deeply. Black Lives Matter. Ideologies that unite people around rebellions, cults of personality and spiritual revolutions that have no roots, no real roots. Like there was a time everybody's running around here talking about, I'm woke, I'm woke, I'm woke, I woke. What are you talking about? I'm woke. Everybody's woke. What are you talking about? Now, some people are mentally dead and some people are resurrected, but I'm woke, I'm woke. You have this thing you want to call yourself with this name, but it has no real roots. What scholarship goes behind or beneath you saying you woke? Because you read a label and the label says this food here has pork in it, or it has a neural disruptor, or it affects, pineal gland activity. Oh, see, I'm woke. I don't eat this. You're still being manipulated by the hidden hand. That's the energy of Shimyaza or even of Azazel. He is the head of the hidden hand, not the face of evil, but the strategist of evil. So if Azazel, if you look at it, I look at a lot of things in terms of art, right? If Azazel is the performer, then Shimyaza is the producer, okay? Being the force behind charismatic deception, peer-pressured rebellion, emotional manipulation that's disguised as inspiration. You see, when you have a scam artist come online and first thing they call you is kings and queens, brother and sister. Yeah, I'm always leery that, when I'm talking to people like, yeah, king, yeah, king. Every other word, they're going to king you to death. Every other word is king, king. I know the scam is coming. The scam is coming. Or, yeah, brothers and sisters. As soon as you say brothers and sisters, you're about to try to rob me. Brothers and sisters, see, that's why we need the money for the such and such. And then we need to get this repaired and get this fixed. Brothers and sisters, we almost there. We almost to the finish line. We just need a little bit more. Brother Azazel, Shimyaza. Shimyaza influences lives by this group think masquerading as awakening. So that's the inspiration of like conscious and woke movements that have no spiritual foundation, or that energy that leads a spiritual revolution, but is based on trauma, is based on ego. It's not based on order. When you're looking at Shimyaza, you're looking at the father of the collective of false light, where there's rebellion, but it's marketed as liberation. So this is one of the reasons why Lovely Inspiration is the title. You have to look at who's organizing your movement. Whose name are you exalting? Is your awakening leading you closer to the law or further into chaos? Right? These are important things that you begin to consider when you own a leader or own a movement. One of the things you happen is, you have to look at when you have these entities like Azazel or Shimyaza, right? These other Nephilim. Here's a good question for you to ask yourself. What happened to their children? Right? When you read right there in the book of Genesis or Bereshit, where it speaks about the enmity put between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, it says that the serpent then has children, right? So what happens to their children? What became of the ones who carried the DNA of the divine, or of the fire of the fallen, or both? Where's the divine seed and where's the fallen entity seeds? Because if they both once walked, then they can both come back and stride. They both can come back. One of the aspects of this inspiration and the mechanics of this inspiration I want to speak about for a second, the biological seed of prophecy. of possession and power is a concept we know as melanin. So when you often say someone is inspired, like what are you really saying? Now, I know I've taught you that inspired means to be in spirit, right? In the Latin, it means to breathe into. So when you look at the Torah, you look at the Quran, it means to be, when you see the word inspired, it means to be moved by the spirit, you know, which is good. None of these I would say are incorrect, but there are levels, right? Again, when you look among the Yoruba, you look among Nile Valley information, you look among the Dogon, right? Inspiration meant contact, to make contact. So that contact was only made possible by this sacred dark material called melanin, right? So melanin in that instance becomes a divine sort of interface. There's a great book by Dr. Richard King, and in that book he teaches that melanin is the black crystal that absorbs light vibrations, and melanin can even absorb gravity. So he shares that melanin is not just pigmentation. You know, people say, "Oh, I'm dark. I'm, this color, so I got melanin." Like I've taught you guys before, everyone has melanin. Everyone, right? It's just to varying degrees, every group of people. If you have blood in your body, you got melanin, So it's not just a pigmentation, but it's a receptive technology that tunes into frequencies beyond ordinary perception, right? So melanin is what allows the soul to feel rhythm. It allows us to receive visions. It allows us to recall memory that exists on the ancestral planes. It's not a skin deep thing; it's a spirit deep thing. So your pineal organ or gland is the seat of prophecy, and if you don't know your pineal, it's coated in melanin. So your brainstem and your spinal cord are like your neural circuitry for divine signals, and they are lined in neural melanin. You've probably heard me speak about neural melanin a lot, or subepidural melanin, right? So, like in the Yoruba cosmology, the Orisha, they ride their children. Or, we say that also in Voodoo, when the Lawal, they ride the person. So they don't just whisper something to you, they possess. In your Kemetic or your Nile Valley temples, priests would invoke the Netir through breathing and through tone and through silence even. In Torah, the prophets didn't study truth, but they received truth. So inspiration wasn't just a mental thing, it was metaphysical. So to be inspired meant to be entered, it meant to be guided, it meant to sometimes even be overtaken by either a divine or a deceptive force. I want that one to be clear to you. When you look at melanin and you look at melanin and ancestral memory, Dr. King sort of confirms that melanin serves as a storage mechanism for genetic and cosmic memory. This is why those with high melanin content, particularly people who are Kibulonic or Nubian descended people, they have a lot of prophetic dreams. They have spontaneous musical rhythm, deep emotional resonance with symbols and myth. That's why you go to a place like Haiti, man. Haiti is like the home, in my opinion. It's might be tied with Mexico, but Haiti is like the home of poetry. They will go all out to hear a poem. If someone is reading a poem, it's like a big thing. That's a symbol there, like, because they deeply resonate with myth. They deeply resonate with symbol, and none of this is romanticism. I'm not saying this in a sort of romantic sort of way. I'm speaking about the neurochemical reality. That's what I'm speaking about. There's a frequency and there's a control. And there's a war over your real inspiration. When inspired sound moves through a melanin dense body, it activates altered states. I've spoken about this many times in segments when I've spoken about Mahalia Jackson, Whitney Houston, even Luther Vandross, right? But there's a certain people, as soon as they open their mouth to sing or even speak, think about it, Keith David, Scatman Struthers, Tone Loc, Jadakiss, right? DMX. I, the list can go on and on. In reality, James L. Jones. There's certain people that they have a certain divine sort of frequency, even in their speech. As soon as they speak, those who have a melanin dense body, they can feel it. They can feel a shift. You may hear Whitney Houston sing, and immediately you start crying. But you could hear someone else sing the same song, let's say a Mariah Carey, and you're like, man, she's tearing it up. She's doing a good job, but it doesn't hit you the same way, right? Because she may not be tapped in. Doesn't mean she's any, less talented or whatever, but she may not be tapped in the same sort of way. This is one of the reasons why slave makers banned the drum. Or why gospel music is often called anointed, even though they don't even know why. They're singing, they couldn't even explain. Why you have zikir or tongues, and their invocations, and they sound similar across cultures, invocations of certain things, So there was a time when the people weren't just trying to be controlled. They were trying to hijack the receivers. The fallen ones were really trying to hijack the receivers. So you have this false light. And when you have false light that's present, you need to ask yourself, who's inspiring you? In the book of Enoch, it says the fallen angels taught enchantment. They taught beauty. They taught performance. But they didn't teach that to elevate people. They taught it to manipulate people. In the Quran, we have Harut and Marut. And they brought magic, but they said, we are only a trial. Do not disbelieve. So they brought all these different sciences and all this technology, and it was really a test, right? In the music industry today, artists speak of alter egos that they channel, and songs that it just came to me, So what really inspired them? When you have inspiration without discernment, that's what's called possession. As Richard King talked about the black dot, his book on Melanin, and he called Melanin the black dot, which was the seat of Kundalini, of Ka, of Chi, of even the Ruach. So the black dot is where divinity kisses humanity. It's an altar. And if you don't guard your altar, someone else will place their image on it. You could spend so much time with your head down, ballet, facing the floor in prostration, and you have a beautiful altar there. You got all your candles, you got all your flowers, you got all your images, you got all your statues, you got all your stones, you have all your symbols, everything you're supposed to have on the altar for you to do what you say you're supposed to do. But you keep your head down for so long that somebody sneaks up while you're in communion, while you're praying, while you're singing, while you're chanting, and replaces your statues, replaces your images. You see? Which is what has happened. So if melanin makes you a receiver, and inspiration can be a gift and can be a weapon, then what happens when a whole people forgets their signal, right? They forget what their signal is supposed to be. If we start to look at how we uncover the true heirs of what was hidden, and how those broken thrones, they have to be remembered now, we can do nothing but to now address bloodlines and broken thrones, right? So there's always been a hidden heirs, if you will. Some of us are, and when I say heirs, I'm saying HEIRS. those who are to inherit it. There's been a war for the womb. And there's been a war for the thrones that exist on the earth. And many of us were born into those wars. I'm going to speak on that, in coming segments. It's very important for you to understand that. But the world tells you that colonization was about land. That's a lie. That's a lie. Here in America, North America, we have a lot of empty land. You go to the middle of the country, it's empty, right? All of the action exists primarily along the eastern coast and then on the west and then, some on the south. But the middle is empty, right? So we know that when they came and colonized this place, it wasn't about land. That's what all the stories tell you. They wanted to escape religious persecution. These people are not religious. Would you stop? These are some of the most godless people that the devil has ever created. Come on, man. They tell you that slavery was about labor. They tell you that the conquest was about trade, even. Oh, Columbus came for spices. Don't nobody travel that far for no damn cumin and paprika. When you look at the scriptures, it tells you something different. It says, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and rulers of darkness on high places, right? That's Ephesians 6:12. So what if the transatlantic Holocaust or the Ma'afa, the colonial invasion of Africa, was not just about human crimes, but it was the result of a war that took place in the cosmos? So this is where you start to look at the bloodlines and the thrones of Akibalan. That was the real target. Genesis 3:15, and I will put enmity between your seed and her seed. So this isn't just about Kawa and a serpent. It's about lineages. It's about a war between the bloodline of the righteous and the seed of the rebellion, right? For those who, there are beings who fell, and for those who are set to rise. So the royal houses of Yehuda, the royal houses of Levi, and the prophets didn't necessarily vanish after the exile. They were dispersed throughout Africa or Kebalan, and they were preserved in tribes like the Ashanti of the Akan, like the Yoruba, like the Limba, like the Igbo, right? And those thrones that were once seated in the heavens descended into flesh. And that's why they had to be stopped. They had to be stopped. Okay? So when you look at the cosmic war that exists behind colonization, you start to get a better understanding. In both the Torah and the Quran, there's a record of a heavenly rebellion, right? So the Nephilim, which were born of the Watchers, they began to corrupt creation. In Islam, you have Iblis, or Shaitan. And Iblis refuses to bow to Adam, and that sets off a war between human destiny and the jinn's disobedience. So these weren't like your cartoon devils. They make cartoons and caricatures out of them so you think that they're not as serious as they are, but when a devil shows up, it only shows up for one thing. It doesn't show up to negotiate, to kick it with you. It shows up to steal, kill, and destroy. That's it. So those were interdimensional rulers who were jealousy of humanity's authority and spiritual potential. So when you look at Psalms 82, it describes Elohim standing among the Elohim, which is a divine council, but the council has been fractured. When you read Revelations 12, it speaks of a war in heaven where Michael is casting out the dragon and the dragon's cohorts, right? The book of Enoch speaks about Shim, Aazelle, and others, and they taught humanity how to sin, but to sin on a divine level. See, a lot of times people don't understand that there's different levels of sin. Like you have human sin and you have divine sin. They're not the same. So the infractions that the Malakim or the Elohim would commit are not the same as your fractions. No different If you go to certain countries, if you go to an Islamic country, you know, it is considered haram to look upon the naked body of another Muslim, right? Um, think about what happened with Noah and his grandson and how he cursed Canaan, right? Which is a whole nother rabbit hole. But people do that all the time here, right? You go to the beach. It's summertime here right now in the north. You go to the beach and you see people who are 95% nude. They're 95% nude. They're 95% naked. It's not a sin. It's okay. Because why? We're at the beach, right? You go to the gym. You see people who are 80% naked. It's okay because I'm working out. These are my workout clothes, right? But if I were to ring someone's doorbell and by mistake a woman came to the door in her panties and bra, she would take off running. Oh my goodness. You know, you saw me in my panties and bra. I saw you in your two-piece bikini already. What's the difference? Right? But that's a part of how you've been tricked and fooled. You see, but there are sins that exist. I'm just using that as an example. So the cosmic sins are different than the human sins. But you got to understand that once these entities fell, they didn't disappear. They enthroned themselves inside of kingdoms. They built empires. And most importantly, they built colonial orders. Colonial orders. So you might ask, well, how does like a principality possess a system? The enemy isn't wearing horns. See, that's what you're taught to believe. You know, you see somebody who looks a certain way, you say that person's a devil. You know, they may have certain features, and you say, I said, look at their eyes, look at their this or whatever a devil looks like to you. That's because of the character that you were given. And you're looking for someone to have the first name Lou and the last name Cypher. And you're like, okay, see, I told you. See, look at the name. That's all tricks, right? Those are all tricks. The enemy doesn't wear horns. The enemy wears titles, right? Now, I'm gonna teach you the titles so you can always spot the enemy. I'm gonna teach you how this works. Governor, viceroy, bishop, president, CEO, pope. There you go. I just taught you how to spot Satan. Those are the new titles, right? So you were taught to look for something else. You were taught to look for someone who has a demonic appearance or is wearing a red suit or has got a pitchfork or all kind of nonsense that has nothing to do with anything. I just gave you the new titles of El Shaitan. Remember, El Shaitan is an office. El Shaitan is not an individual. It's a state. It's an office that you can elect for. You can be El Shaitan if you so choose. When you look at the kingdoms of Portugal, you look at Spain, you look at Britain, France, they became spiritual weapons, not just colonial powers. Each one, if you look at it, they didn't just come with guns and gunpowder and knives and swords and cannons, but they also came with Bibles. And they didn't come with Bibles to teach the truth, but to desecrate sacred memory that already existed. So wherever they went, they decapitated priesthoods, they burnt scrolls, they violated the wombs of sacred women, and they rebranded prophecy and called it folklore. Because the goal was not assimilation, but the goal was replacement. You see, so you're looking at these crusaders and stuff, and you're not realizing this was a cosmic thing, because colonization is the suppression of prophetic and genetic prophecy. So the Ma'afa was actually a ritual. You see, cargo ships were floating coffins, and they were carrying those ships that you call slave ships during the Middle Passage, during the transatlantic enslavement of Africans. They carried more royal blood than any European cathedral. You could add all of the European cathedrals in the world, and those boats carried more royal blood than all of them put together. See, the middle passage was an intentional disruption of the ancestral code. It was a breaking of lineage, it was a fracturing of tongues, and it was a dismantling of altars. So plantation breeding wasn't just sexual assault, it was bloodline engineering. It was a satanic attempt to dilute prophetic genetics. When you look at Deuteronomy 28, it's not just speaking about poetry, it's speaking about a genetic pattern, a genetic curse pattern, rather. So you'll be taken to a land you don't know, you'll be called by a byword, you'll be made to forget the name of your Elohim. That's a spiritual war. That's a spiritual war, right? So there are certain things that have been preserved in that you're taught not to see the correlations in. This goes us back to Anu Nation, the organization or the movement rather, that I father. In Anu, we understand or we study the correlations as opposed to creating this myopic foolishness, because some people say, man, you always quote the Quran. And that really turns off a lot of Hebrews. Like a lot of Hebrews want to get with me and they've told me, but you keep talking that Muslim stuff. Yeah, it's not my fault you don't know, because I've taught you. And I'm not the first one. It's not my fault that you fell for the okie doke. Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Israel, who before that his name was Yaqub. He had two sons, and they both practiced the way of their fathers. So Ishmael's, or the Ishmaelites, went on to later become the Muslims. He had 12 sons, similar story, and created the Ishmaelite nation, or what you may know as the Muslims. Then you had Yaqub, who went on to create or to father the Israelite nation, what you may know as Hebrews. But they have the same father. You're not getting it. They have the same father. But your problem is that one calls Jesus a prophet and the other one calls him God. And you haven't realized that they're both right. And in some ways, they're both wrong. But you've been taught that division to keep the royal bloodlines from ever joining. If you knew that, our family could get back together. But when the family gets back together, that is, according to prophecy, that is one of the things that heralds the destruction. So people have to make sure that the family never gets back together. So when you hear someone like me saying, yeah, I'm quoting certain texts and pulling certain things together and teaching you about the Akan, teaching you about the Yoruba, teaching you about the Igbo, and it's like, see, he's all over the place. No, we're all over the place. We were scattered. So even in the Khan, your naming had to be disrupted. That's why you got these horrible names, because names are assignments. You have the Akan naming system, and its system codes the soul's mission based on the day of birth, right? So in the Hebraic tribal structure, it assigns a spiritual function based on lineage and calendar alignment, right? So if you look at both systems, time determines temperament. Birth determines your role, and your name carries a purpose. So colonizers, they knew that from rip, and they understood, like, we got to replace that. So where if you may have had names like Kojo, Kofi, Kwame, now you have James, John, Joseph. You have Yehuda, Levi, and Asher, with a slave name unknown, right? You just, we don't know your name, your last name, or you came from the tribe of Yehuda, you came from the tribe of Asher, you came from the tribe of Levi. We don't know where you came. It's so important to understand, because oftentimes you're given an image of, like, these people were captured, they were in the woods just beating on drums and swinging from tree to tree and eating raw meat. Like, and many of you still hold those images, but many of the individuals who were taken in the Ma'afa identified as Muslim. They identified as Muslim, but it was primarily Hebrews that were taken. If you could figure out that riddle, which is not really much of a riddle because I made it pretty much clear to you just now, then you'd understand some things. They touched upon that in the movie Roots, if you remember. Kunta Kinte was Muslim, and he was taken from around the Gambia area. So in that instance, right, people often think that, like I said, like savages were brought over. But if they were Muslim, these are people who came with Quran. Well, they already had the Quran. They were already reading the Quran, right? I'm just going to use the Muslim part. That's the newer part, right? We'll pretend that the Hebrews were taken, didn't know how to read, and they weren't already reading Hebrew, and they weren't already reading Torah. We could pretend, right? But for sure that the Muslims were reading the Quran because the Quran had already been revealed. So why do you have this image that people came over here and they were illiterate? When it speaks about the revelation of these new prophecies or the revelation of these new messages, they were written down. So somebody was reading them. You got to understand that when you were watched, you were studied. You were studied, just like you're being studied now. That's why your whole life is put on display, whether it's a TikTok dance or an IG tutorial or YouTube. You put yourself on display. Yo, I'm going to take you through my hood. I'm going to show you how we do this. Come on. I'm show you how we live. I'm show you how we make something out of nothing. You're on display. So as a result, when the colonizers came, they didn't just want your body. They wanted your name erased from the Lamb's book. They wanted you to take on a new name. They wanted that joint erased. So let's look at the real reason why they came to the continent. Africa, I'm using the term Africa. I don't hardly ever use it, but just it will help. Africa wasn't targeted because it was poor. It was targeted because it was so rich. But Africa was rich genetically. Africa was rich cosmologically. Africa was rich spiritually. The Earth's most melanated people living on the planet's most electromagnetically charged land, governed by ancestral codes. That's a serious threat to rebellious principalities that, are governed or are fallen entities. Colonization was a cosmic coup. It was an attempt to replace the chosen vessels with synthetic thrones. I'm saying it, so I really hope you get this part. Because they never accounted for a simple thing, the awakening. They never accounted for that the heirs of these thrones would eventually awake. So you have a Kibalionic African descendants who are now remembering their spiritual names, not just legally, but spiritually. You have certain sacred rituals that are returning, and they're not just returning as trends, but as transmissions. The veil is now being lifted, and with it, the false altars are now falling apart. That's why many of you are being called home, not just to a Kibalon, but to your divine assignment. Because once the heirs return, the false kings, they have to fall. That's how that works. So I want you to really kind of give some thought, and if we can go a little deeper, this inspiration that moves in this world, but it isn't divine. So if it's not divine, what is it? What's truly behind some of your art, behind some of your visions, behind some of your politics, behind some of your voices? You're entering into the realm of the watchers, and this counterfeit light that still tries to pour into the chosen. You see, we're coming to the place of last warnings. You want to know what lovely inspiration really looks like. It looks like The inspiration, the lovely inspiration that makes you feel good. And there's a point there that I'm going to have to explore at another time. The pride and the shame that so many people avoid. We talk about a lot of times, or it's talking about women's aversion to accountability. There's no secret anymore. Women even talk about it. Women know. Women hate accountability. They hate admitting when they're wrong, being accountable, being truly remorseful, being truly repentant. They'll use all kind of shame tactics to make you forget that they are actually wrong. We know. There is a spirit behind that. So when you look at lovely inspiration, right? Feel good. What does it look like? It looks like a rainbow flag on a church while children are trafficked in the basement. It looks like a NASA badge on someone's chest while you have Freemasons who consecrate the launch pad. Yeah, when they launch satellites, when they launch ships through the holes in the firmament, many of you didn't know it was the Freemasons who actually consecrate those pads. You can go to the pads and you can see the Freemason symbols on them. It looks like a vegan tech mogul building brain chips that he promises will heal people, while at the same time preparing a digital soul prison. It's a president who quotes scriptures while dropping every bomb that he possibly could get his hands on the children of Yaqub. So you want the lovely, it looks like a fallen angel in a lab coat. There's a watcher on a talk show smiling while dismantling family culture. Or a healer on mushrooms channeling a spirit that actually hates the Elohim. It's important for you to understand that the global system itself is not secular, it's ritualistic. So just like the UN, the United Nations, they have a meditation room, and their meditation, again, look up everything I'm saying, but the meditation room is shaped like an altar. And at the center, there's a black magnetic cube. Why? The Pope kisses the feet of African presidents, but he never opens the Vatican archives. Why? Then you have the World Economic Forum. The World Economic Forum talks peace while they're writing the script for engineered famines. They're engineering famines and starvation throughout the world while they're talking. We're going to have peace talks. Some of you don't know what peace talks are. It's when they sit down and they engineer wars, and they engineer famines, and they engineer chaos and calamities. That's what happens during peace talks. So it's not a random thing. It's a global cathedral that's built on the bones of prophets. The Nomo that we speak about and the Dogon, they're not coming. They're not coming. And the reason why the Nomo are not coming, because they never left. If you really understand how to read those quote unquote mysteries, the serious knowledge that, and when I say serious, SIRIUS, that many people revere, think about this. What if it's just old watcher technology that's rebooted? What if the UFOs disclosure that they're slowly having now, they say, oh, we have UAPs. What if it's a controlled leak? And they're controlling the leak slowly of the information. So when the quote unquote aliens, Ali Anu, Ali exalted, Anu from heaven, the aliens, when they arrive, they'll just be the same fallen beings, but they put them in new suits. So you'll think something just came, but they'll do it in a way we don't know. They didn't just come, they were already here. They just put a new suit on them. So what if when you're watching these Marvel movies, they're preparing you with soft disclosure so that when the saviors land, you already trust them, the saviors, It's important to understand, just like your vision and your thoughts and your emotions and your spirit are being corrupted, your blood is still being corrupted. CRISPR, CRISPR. Look that up. That's the scalpel of Azazel. Then we have digital IDs that are becoming more and more prevalent and required. That's nothing but Simyaza's contract. So you have a scalpel by Azazel, and then you have a contract by Simyaza. AI religion is a tower that Babel built. So the spiritual war is a war that's now digitized because your thoughts are being harvested. You throw every thought, every situation you get into, you put it online. Every breakup, every traffic jam, every road rage incident, every discussion with your boss. You get fired from your job, you're on YouTube crying. You get a new job and you're on IG and you're celebrating and saying God is so good. DoorDash, your thoughts are being harvested. Everything you feel. See, that's what's called the matrix. You pour everything into the system, but if I'm sitting next to you and I say, what's going on? You just shrug your shoulder and say, I'm all right. Then you get on Twitter and say, Chief over here asking me how I am. SMH. See, everything gets poured into that. So as a result, like I said, your thoughts are harvested. Your rituals are now mimicked. Your language is commodified, and your ancestral codes are in Google's cloud. Now, why are they doing that? Because they're reformatting your soul. So now, when someone says, well, the Bible is the inspired word of God, you need to now look at that and say, is that really a compliment? Is inspiration really the compliment? I think it is. Because you were programmed to worship channelers. And these are people who you worship them and you revere their downloads. Jerry and Esther Hicks, you revere the downloads. You trust anyone who has a crystal and an Instagram filter. If I took this pillowcase off right now and I took all the stuffing out of it and I put it on top of my head some kind of stupid way and put a flower or a freaking feather on my head and I held a crystal, you'd listen to me even more. This video will get more views. Because you don't realize you've been programmed to revere people who look like that and act like that. The Swami, right? To be very clear on all of that, if inspiration doesn't come with instruction, it's invasion. If your muse never leads you to order, it's a demon in drag. It's a demon in drag. You have to realize you are the final act of an ancient war. So the descendants of the Watchers, now they run the government. They are in government positions. That's why all of your presidents have been related. It's a bloodline thing. The daughters of men are still being seduced, and the children of the covenant are still being erased, one lie at a time. And it's one lovely lie at a time. That's how they're erasing you. One lovely lie at a time, because we live in a season now where these Watchers have made sin look sacred. They've made rebellion sound like poetry, and then they make you mistake spiritual possession for purpose, but you call it inspiration. So there's no upliftment, there's no altar call, in this, I know the way I may teach a lot of times, it may not feel like it's taking you where you want to go, because it's like, when's he going to do the altar call? And, you tired of your priest dancing in the videos, come to Anu, or when is there going to be that upliftment? I'm going to tell you it like this. I got to tell you how it is and what it is. Check your dreams. Every dream ain't right. Check your teachers. Every teacher ain't right. Check your damn downloads. This reverence of what a download is, because everything beautiful isn't holy. Everything that feels good might be the whisper of the one who fell first. And some of you may be like, what the heck is download? So I'm not going to assume that you all know what that is. Many of you do. In spiritual, quote unquote, culture, a download is when someone says they receive like a sudden inspiration or vision without any study, without teaching, and without explanation. They just knew something and it came to them. Here's the truth of that. A download is not divine by default. It's a spiritual transmission, sure, but from who? Right? Without any level of discernment, a download is just an open port. It's a gateway, it's a channel. And anything can come through that channel. So just because it sounded deep, just because it felt even electric, or just because it may have moved you, that doesn't mean that it came from El Elyon, or from the Most High, or from the originator. It doesn't mean that. Years ago, we had one of the deadliest downloads in modern history. One of them in modern history. 1978, there was a man by the name of Jim Jones, and he told over 900 people. These were Nubian elders, children, whole families. He told them to drink poison in the jungles of Guyana. He called it a revolutionary suicide. And he said that it was ordained by God. He said the Spirit told him what was coming. And they believed him because it sounded inspired, because he spoke in tongues, because he fed the poor and he quoted the Bible. So as a result, over 900 souls were slaughtered by a download. It's not prophecy. That was Simyaza in a white suit. That was Aazelle on a microphone. You know, that was a lying spirit that wore a face of a savior. And it's still happening right into this day. It's still happening. You know, you have many downloads that end in blood. You had Marshall Applewhite. Marshall Applewhite said that aliens were coming. You had an organization by the name of Heaven's Gate. And 39 people in Heaven's Gate followed him to death, right? The Crusades were justified by divine dreams, and millions of people were slaughtered. Then you had colonizers who said, God told us this land is ours. So then what happened after that? God told you the land is yours, so genocide then comes after that. So you shouldn't confuse inspiration with instruction. Don't call every vision holy just because it shakes you. Or the devil can give you downloads too, you know, and oftentimes his downloads are way more vivid. They're way more emotional, and they feel more urgent because he knows he's running out of time. Remember, Genesis, he told the serpent, you will crawl on your belly for the rest of your life until the day you die. That means you die one day. You die one day. So if I know that, and I know that my time is not infinite, but it's finite, then I'm going to make every download or vision and inspiration that I give to erase the bloodline, I'm going to make it seem like the most urgent thing in the world. Get yours today. Weekend special, Memorial Day special. Get it now before we out. Supplies are limited. So not every voice in your head is an ancestor. And not every light in the sky came to save you. That's just the reality of it, folks. So willfully, this concept or this idea of lovely inspiration, it sparks proper thought in you. for you to explore. Any name that I shared, you should learn it. If you never heard the name of those entities that I gave you, Simyaza, Aazelle, Quetzalcoatl, Varocha, Ogun or Rumila, go study. And don't study to go find new things to worship. I've been teaching you that since I first started doing broadcasts. I'm not teaching you all the names of these entities so you have another 500 gods to go worship. I'm teaching you so you know what's what and won't get confused and won't end up worshiping something that you shouldn't be worshiping, because now you know the science and the formulas and the secrets behind it. You stop thinking that everything is so freaking divine that really ain't that divine. Because sometimes you're just following the path of a fallen Elohim. You're just working with Nephilim, thinking that it's so divine because it's otherworldly. So what? A rich person on this planet could introduce some of you to a world that you've never known existed. Should you worship them? Well, some of you do. Some of you do. Idol worship. You idolize them. You see? Because it seems like they live in another world. But it doesn't mean that they're divine. Ooh, there's so much to that. There's so much to that, which we'll get into eventually for our new members. Some of this stuff, this is just not the platform to really share on it. But in any event, if you're interested, join anulifeglobal.org. The link is always on the bottom of the videos, the website rather. And I want to thank all of you. I know we've had some recent applicants, and willfully your orientation, everything works out well for you. And we'll be kicking it at the next retreat together, laughing, joking, smiling, and learning. And for those of you who've been supporting the ministry, thank you so very much. It helps, like I shared recently, we're really looking to expand the land holdings that we have. We have some land now, but really expand it in a way where more people can be accommodated, like we've been doing the retreats and we've been doing it. We've been renting spaces, like campsites and stuff like that. And I made a decision after this last one. I don't want to do that anymore. We got to be on our own space, even if it's a slither. if we got to tie a bunch of ropes to trees and, build a bunch of tree houses down a road, like being in your own space on your own land and consecrating your own land is necessary and vital, but it also provides a space for people who may need, the economy is doing some very interesting things. And there's a certain trust that people need to let go of. When I hear people talk about Babylon and they're like, well, I have to know this and I got to learn this. You assume that these systems are going to be here all the time. That's the problem. And I've known people who have spent a very long time getting a certain amount of education for fields that no longer even exist. They're gone. They don't exist anymore. There was a time when, we had elevator operators. So some of you be probably like, for what? Just press the button, right? But there was a time that there was elevator operators, There have been whole fields that have disappeared. Lawyers are scrambling for work right now because you can go online and get a lot of different information. You can have artificial intelligence write up whole contracts for you. And of course, lawyers will say, yeah, you could do that, but I wouldn't trust. Of course, you're going to say don't trust it because it's putting you out of business. Of course, you're going to say that. But if I have a lawyer write up a contract for me and it costs me $1,000 and I can have artificial intelligence do it and then have a lawyer review it and that costs me $200, it's no brainer. Doctors are not even getting as much work because now I don't have to go to the doctor for every little thing. I can go to WebMD. I can see pictures and things like that and get an understanding of my symptoms and what's wrong with me, right? So the world is changing, and the things that are not changing is you can still grow peppers, you can still grow potatoes, you can still practice husbandry on goats and lambs, and different fowl of the air, and you can still have fish that you farm and that you learn about and learn how to preserve and heal from the land. Those things have not changed. Those things have not changed as of yet. So some of the systems that you've been looking to build yourself on, and you've been inspired towards that direction. You've been inspired towards that direction to keep the royal down, to keep your name erased, and to keep the royal down. And that's what segment has been about, what we've been speaking about. And I'll get into this a little bit more. Be sure definitely to join the Facebook group, I Know Life Global Village. I did a whole series there, an Akan Wisdom series, that I may turn into a guide as well. But it taught some of the things that I shared about the naming, of the Akan, some of the traditions and things like that. I think you would enjoy it. Check it out. All right. So with that, this has been Chief Yuya. I am the head Jegna of the Anu Nation and the head minister of the Anu Life Global Ministries. Thank you so much for coming through and tuning in. Shabbat Shalom.